This piece in Unheard,
Mhm.
which I'm quite proud of. They've got it. It's their flagship piece for the weekend.
That's great.
And the title, and I should tell you, I've gotten into a little trouble with Unheard because titles are almost never given by the authors of pieces. They're put in afterwards so they can catch you by surprise. And anyway, this one is now titled Why We Should Welcome the Lab Leak Hypothesis, which is frankly a slightly awkward title at my insistence that
Right.
hypothesis be there.
Well, I was just trying to show, but my screen is showing that you can see in the URL that it's still got the original title there.
Yeah. In any case, what we should really welcome is the strong probability that this virus emerged from the lab, which I realize is going to sound crazy to people because that sounds like a terrible, terrible thing has happened. And in fact, a terrible, terrible thing has happened either way. But yes, the piece goes through the logic of why I believe that the emerging picture in which nobody will debate you taking the side of defending the natural origin, because that's becoming an impossible position to sustain, right? That's actually, given that COVID happened, it's a good thing.
So let's walk through it.
Okay.
So I mean, the piece is terrific and well worth reading, but I think that in 30 seconds we'll take longer because we'll riff on it. But like we should encapsulate the argument because it's very important.
Yeah. So I'd like you to read it. And I will say in passing, you mentioned your book about your time as a graduate student, and it occurred to me too late here. I didn't realize it, but I talk about my time as a graduate student studying bats, but I didn't think to have them hot link the book in which me as a graduate student features as an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
In Elizabeth Royt's book, The Tapir's Morning Bath.
In which she identifies you quite accurately as a maverick scientist.
Yes, I think she was playing on Bret Maverick, but in any case, it's a really cool book. Talk about a great title. I mean, doesn't the title Tapir's Morning Bath make you want to pick up a copy and figure out what the hell that could possibly mean?
I mean, it does me. I'm not sure some people will.
I mean, if you know
not feel
tapirs,
that same way.
if you know tapirs,
which I do.
Sure.
Most people don't know tapirs.
No. We actually saw one last time we were in the Amazon, which was quite cool.
Yeah, galumphing about.
I got a terrible picture of it.
Yes, that's the kind of pictures they like to have taken of them.
They tend to get taken. But anyway, so my time as a graduate student studying bats shows up in this piece because of the following phenomenon. When Heather and I emerged from the Amazon in, remind me of the date?
January 2020.
Late January 2020. We emerged to a story. Our phones leapt to life after us being out of contact. And because we were in Ecuador, our phones actually awoke to Ecuadorian news. And there was a news story in Ecuador about the first case of what was then still called novel coronavirus in Ecuador. And we just became aware of what this was. And we didn't know if this was going to be like SARS or like MERS or like, the threats of bird flu, H1N1 or whatever that had passed, or whether this was going to be some major story that we needed to worry even more about. And I did have, as the basics of the story emerged, as it became clear that whatever this virus was ultimately traced its origin back to horseshoe bats, it kind of stopped me in my tracks because as a biologist working on bats, I handled so many of them so many times. And in fact, I handled them without any protective gear. And the reason I handled them with no protective gear was that was the standard amongst the biologists who taught me to work with bats. And the reason that we didn't do things like wear gloves was that these bats are incredibly fragile and they get caught in the mist nets. And in order to get them out of the mist nets, you need all of the dexterity and sensation in your fingers. Otherwise, you risk injuring the animals. And so anyway, we learned to be very careful with them and good. And, it's not like we were constantly getting bit. We were very careful not to be bit, but there were, vampire bats in nets sometimes. And vampire bats have very, very sharp teeth, easily capable of slicing you open. But in any case, we worked without protective gear, and I thought, oh my goodness, we've got a pandemic that is endangering the world, and it's come from somebody's contact with a bat in one way or another, or something like that. And I thought, was I risking causing something like this by working with bats and not realizing that every contact we have with such a creature is an opportunity for a pandemic to start. And it took me months to understand why actually that was very unlikely. And the reason that it was unlikely has a lot to do with the evolutionary job that a new pathogen that enters humans is faced with when it jumps a gap. It has to get into a cell. It has to successfully reproduce, and in order not to be just in a single cell, it has to spread from one cell to the next. And then it has to jump from one person to the next, and it has to do it at a rate that actually creates spread, right? If it's too aggressive, it can burn out very quickly. If it's too timid, then people recover too quickly. And so it has to nail these things. And typically the way that happens in those cases when it does happen is that there's an evolutionary period in which a virus that is very poor at doing this job initially gets better at it by leaping from one person to another. And it basically gains evolutionary experience. It adapts. So the point is, if I were to have contracted a virus in my field work, it would very likely not have been capable of these things. The chances of it making it into a pandemic are tiny, which then raises the question about whether or not our assumption about the hazard of pandemics is too great, and that elevated sense of danger is what caused us to do gain-of-function research, which, yes, we have not proven that that's where this virus came from, but we were at least creating the hazard that something would leak from the lab in Wuhan or in North Carolina, or there's one in Texas, that something would emerge and create a global pandemic. That was a hell of a lot of danger to put us to, and the question is, maybe we overrated the hazard that we were trying to control. All right, so take a breath. Is there more to say before I say why I think we
just want the proceed. We just want the conclusion so that people can encapsulate it and know what the it's not a hypothesis here, but know what the thesis is.
The thesis is.
Yes.
So the thesis is, if you compare the two scenarios, one scenario, this has emerged from nature, right? If it has emerged from nature, then it's going to happen again. And the only thing we can do is study these things, maybe enhance these pathogens in order to study them so that we can figure out what to do next. But if we enhance them, that means we're going to have natural pandemics. We're going to have man-made pandemics when these things leak from the lab, and we're just stuck with this forever. On the other hand, if this leaked from a lab and the danger of it leaping from nature is lower than we think, then we can stop taking these things into the lab and enhancing them, and thereby eliminate the majority of the danger. So I have gone from initially saying, I really, really hope this wasn't a laboratory leak, because in some sense, I don't want science to have been responsible for this. It was the international scientific community, and I don't want that to have been the case. But at this point, that community has behaved so badly, and much more importantly, our well-being as a species going forward more or less depends on the fact that there's something we can do about this so we don't end up with the next COVID.
Right. So if this turns out to have been a leak from a lab, what that will reveal is that the rot at the center of the social system that does science, both in the US and worldwide, is corrupt and has a rot at its core, likely. And that's terrible, and I don't want that to be true. However, the analysis that you arrive at is, we have seen, whether or not this is a lab leak, we have seen evidence of so much of the corruption throughout so much of this pandemic that we're already most of the way to the evidence needed for that conclusion, regardless, not the lab leak hypothesis, but the conclusion that the social system that does science is corrupted and needs to be fixed. Then if you take the two main hypotheses, and there are others, of course, but the two main hypotheses on their merits without thinking about the social implications, if this is a natural zoonotic spillover event, that suggests that perhaps something about our changing way of interacting with the world, a changing population densities, any number of things, will mean that this is just the first of many. And can the world, in fact, deal with another pandemic like this? 2 more, 8 more, 10 more? Probably not. as opposed to if this was a virus that was modified in a lab and leaked from a lab, we have control over whether or not future pandemics like this happen.
Yes, at least potentially. And I would say there are two things here. One is the social system that allowed this to happen, which to my mind is actually the much more frightening thing, because
Right, which is why I still really wish that what we now know is true wasn't true, but given that it's true, we've seen it, right?
Right. Nonetheless, we've encountered this failure so many different places. COVID is, the clearest I've ever seen it, because, and believe me, lab leak is the shallow end, right? This only gets worse, and ivermectin begins to tell you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. But the social system surrounding sense making, reporting, and then whatever this thing is that is telling us what we are allowed to say and think. And yes, it doesn't tell you in absolute terms. You can't say or think these things, but the pressure not to admit what you privately believe is so great and so dangerous to us that yes, that thing and all of the things it's connected to, the social media platforms, the regulatory apparatus, the scientific and academic apparatus, all of that has some sort of rot within it that is putting us in danger.
Well, in point of correction, it is in fact telling some people quite directly, no, you may not say that, by shutting down, for instance, social media accounts.
Right. What it isn't doing,
or by reversing the decision on papers that have been peer reviewed and accepted, and then saying, actually not. By keeping data and analysis away from the public eye, away from scientific analysis, and then also by keeping most of the rest of us who aren't actively doing research in this area from keeping many people from actually saying what they think, the conversation is beyond being steered.
Well, okay, this is my error. Some people have been told what they can say and or think. Others are not. The differential nature of this thing is bewildering, because if you look out and you say, you can't mention ivermectin. Really? I see it mentioned all over the place. In fact, we've mentioned it many, many times. How is it that we can mention it and others can't, right? On the other hand, if you go looking for the control mechanism, it's unbelievable, right? This thing is actually resulting in accounts being suspended, etc. So,
well, and our Clips channel got its first ding, and this week for talking about ivermectin.
Well, our Clips channel got the first. It's technically not a strike, it's technically a warning, but you get 3 warning or strike per channel, and then they take it.
And you're out.
So this is Google firing a shot across the bow on our livelihood, right? They have picked a video, right? They have claimed that we violated these guidelines in some way. They're not specific, so we can't challenge it. There's no venue. You can file an appeal. Who knows what happens there? But it's very obvious. I mean, it happened, in conjunction with this, and I did the podcast with Pierre Corey live because I wanted it to get out, right? So then we get this warning, right, which is an indication that Google has targeted our livelihood and would like us to know that it has, and, what it is that they would like us not to be talking about. And, okay, this is a control mechanism. It's not absolute, right? I don't expect anybody to show up with weapons, but the fact is livelihood is livelihood, and they're threatening it. So that whole social layer, which is somehow connected to academia and journalism and all of the rest, that academic layer is one of the failures. And the other failure has to do with gain-of-function research and how we got here. And the gain-of-function research problem is tractable. But the problem is, in order for us to learn the right lesson and to fix the gain-of-function research problem, we have to understand what happened, and what happened involves that other layer, right? So one of the things I'm watching, which is actually causing my blood to boil, is the process of the construction of the replacement narrative, the one that does admit that this could well have come from the lab in Wuhan. Right? So they're going to admit that at some level. Now, they're still playing games and saying most scientists believe this is unlikely, but we all want it investigated, as we all did all along, which is, of course, total bullshit. Yep. But the other thing they're doing is they are steering the conversation away from the people who saw it most clearly early, right? So some of those people are us. The one that is most galling, though, is the way Yuri Dagan is being shoved out of the position of having systematically gone through. And I would ask you, if you haven't read Yuri Dagan's Medium piece, go back to it, right? Here is a guy who, like us, was not looking for this to be a lab leak. In fact, was looking for it not to be, and wanted the evidence so that he would be in a good position to repel the claim that this had come from the lab. And what he found out was the more you dig, the more it looks like it probably did come from the lab. So that's an honest broker. This is somebody who's got the chops to sort it out. He's done a very good job. He and Rosanna Segreto have unearthed a tremendous amount of data that the world wouldn't know about without them. And so the idea that they're going to rewrite the narrative, right? You and I and the other people who were early here, right? The Josh Rogans, the Matt Ridleys, they're going to be shoved to the side. Nicholas Wade is going to be the explanation for why the world suddenly realized that it was making a mistake. Everybody's going to claim they wanted Origins investigated from the beginning. Everybody's going to claim they never ruled out this possibility. The stigma campaign that was targeted directly at us is going to be, erased from history. And the whole point of this operation, the whole point of generating the new narrative, is to make sure
Their point, our point.
Their point. What they are doing is they are creating the mechanism that frees them from learning the lesson of what went wrong here. What they don't want to do is empower the people who got it right and result in the people who got it wrong, the elite. They don't want them to be ignored in the future because they got this one wrong, right? They want everything to stay the same, and so they're going to slightly alter the narrative so it contains more truth. Yes, this might have come from the Wuhan lab, but then everything else is going to be rigged around not learning the lesson. And a system that does not learn the lesson, right, is a dangerous system. It's exactly what happened at Evergreen, right? Evergreen bent over backwards not to learn the lesson of the week of riots, right? And it is still not learning that lesson, and it is on the brink of failure.
And this actually, I'm reminded of one of the things that we've done consistently as parents, and which we also talk about in the relevant chapter in our book, is when mistakes were made, we seek accountability, be it in us or our children, but dwelling on the past is only useful so long as you can learn from it in order to not make the mistake again in the future. So the sort of the tagline that you started using on our boys, and that I do too now, is it's about the future. Like this, yes, there needs to be accountability, but this is all about the future. We won't change the past, no matter how much we come to realize that perhaps we made errors there. What we need to do is create a better future than we could have if we put our heads in the sand and denied that we did what we did.
Yeah, and actually, we have a few little tools here that work really well to get you into the right mindset. It's about the future, right? That's why you should be grateful that this may have come from a lab, because we can fix that problem.
Exactly.
Right? You can
Yes.
plug a leak.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about the future. That wasn't your best work, right?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
what'd you learn?
Mhm.
Those three will get you a long way.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And it turns out that not your best work, as opposed to stamping gold stars on people's foreheads for any kind of effort at all, is a much better way to create resilient, strong, and yes, anti-fragile children that become anti-fragile adults than telling them that no matter what they've done, even if it is demonstrably crap, is actually really, really good.
Yeah, and you will find actually that if you start using these devices, that it is much easier also to critique yourself, right? Like, well, that wasn't my best work, So
Man.
you could just start from there, right?
I had one of these this week, so I was lucky enough to get out stand-up paddleboarding on the Willamette twice this week, and usually I just make it easy on myself and I carry the board. I carry the board down to the water and back up separately from like the paddle and life jacket and all the other gear. But coming out, I go in like near dawn-ish to avoid the fast boats, because although they make it challenging and useful, it's more interesting. You see more wildlife if they aren't churning the water around you. But by the time I came out, there were a lot of people where I had to come out, and I thought, I just want to get everything up to the car and rearrange there rather than leave a bunch of my stuff down here. And so I sort of like hitched hitched the stuff to the board and was carrying it up these stairs, and it's like bouncing on the stairs. I'm like, God, I'm doing a crap job here. This is really not my best work at all. And I could laugh about it and I could fix it. But, really overall, I'd just be like, nope, that was not good decision making. Nothing about that was my best work.
Yeah, not your best work. And you know what you learned,
Yeah.
2 trips.
Yeah.
Really.
2 trips.
2 trips with
2
a
trips.
stand-up paddleboard. You want
Yeah.
2 trips.
Yeah. So, apropos nothing except not my best work.
Not your best work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we done with that? You want to talk about ivermectin?
Yeah, I would just say there's a lot more in that article. I think there's a lot kind of buried in, a lot of threads for future discussion. And, it's worth reading. It's worth reading.
No, it's excellent.
And
It's
check out
definitely worth
Elizabeth
reading.
Reut's book on the long ago chapter of my life where I was a bat biologist.
Yeah. Tapir's morning bath.
The Tapir's morning bath.
Yeah.